Capitalism can never stay home. It goes abroad. The ordinary people simply paid the cost of empire.
So we last left off in 1867, near the end of the period that colonists and their apologists call the Zulu Wars, although this would more accurately be described as an era of aggressive colonial expansion facilitated by mass murder of indigenous peoples. I mentioned the discovery of diamonds at Kimberley, but before we discuss the diamond and gold rushes of South Africa, we will spend some time on the rise and fall of the Zulu monarchy. The Zulu kingdom emerged under the leadership of Shaka Kazenzangakhona, who became chief in 1816. One of the most influential monarchs of the Zulu, he ordered wide-reaching reforms that reorganized the military into a lethal fighting force. You might say, the most lethal fighting force the indigenous Africans had at the point. King Shaka was born in July 1787, near present-day Melmoth, in the KwaZulu-Natal province. He was the son of the Zulu king Senzangakhona. Spurned as an illegitimate son, Shaka spent his childhood in his mother's settlements, where he was initiated into an Ibuto Lempi, a fighting unit, serving as a warrior under Inkosi Dingasweyo. King Shaka further refined the Ibuto military system, and with the Matetwa paramountcy's support over the next several years, forged alliances with his smaller neighbors to counter Ndwandwe raids from the north. The initial Zulu maneuvers were primarily defensive, as King Shaka preferred to apply pressure diplomatically, with an occasional strategic assassination. His reforms of local society built on existing structures. Although he preferred social and propagandistic political methods, he also engaged in a number of battles.
It's pretty based.
King Shaka's reign coincided with the start of the Mfukane or the Difakane, which is upheaval or crushing, a period of devastating warfare and chaos in southern Africa between 1815 and about 1840 that depopulated the region. The interpretation of the Mfukane has evolved over time. Early accounts attributed the upheaval primarily to Shaka Zulu's expansionist policies. However, modern historians view it as a result of more complex and long-standing processes of state formation, environmental pressures, and the impact of global trade networks. Severe droughts between 1800 and 1818 led to resource scarcity and competition. The international ivory trade allowed leaders to amass unprecedented wealth and power. With the increased opportunities for profit, the already existing process of the formation of states in South Africa intensified, including the expansion of the Dutch Cape Colony. This further displaced indigenous peoples, triggering a chain reaction of migrations, which further escalated conflicts over land and resources. During this time, other powerful kingdoms arose alongside the Zulus. The Ndwandwe under Zwide and the Matetwa under Dingaswayo all emerged as dominant forces. Refugee groups often conquered others in their path, establishing new kingdoms such as the Sotho, Swazi, Ndebele, and Gaza, not to be confused with Gaza Strip or the Gazankulu Bantustan. And this was an interesting Wikipedia article I sent you guys. There was an entire area of a kingdom called the Gaza Kingdom that existed in South Africa around this time.
Very cool.
Just happened to be named that. Shaka revolutionized Zulu military tactics and organization, creating a formidable standing army. He is credited with elevating the Zulu from a fairly insignificant group, one among others, to a more unified quote-unquote state. Shaka conquered, incorporated, or allied with neighbors such as the Matetwa, Ndwandwe, Hlubi, Kwabe, and Mkhize to dominate a 200-kilometer-wide area north of the present-day city of Durban. Shaka's military innovations included assegai, or a short spear, and ikwa, a curved stabbing sword, warfare. He introduced these weapons, which allowed Zulu warriors to fight in tight formations and exploit enemy weaknesses. Shaka organized his warriors into smaller, mobile units called impis to increase their speed and maneuverability on the battlefield. He formed his warriors into a crescent-shaped formation, resembling the horns of a buffalo, to encircle and trap enemy forces. Shaka's military reforms enabled the Zulu kingdom to expand its territory and dominate surrounding tribes. His legacy is complex, with some portraying him as a bloodthirsty dictator and others recognizing his strategic genius and diplomatic efforts to protect international traders. Dan Wiley is an English professor who has written numerous research papers and 2 academic books on Shaka, and this is a portion of his explanation of Shaka's legacy from an interview in 2023. Western narratives regarding Shaka's legacy can be broadly lumped under, quote, monster or, quote, heroic genius. The first white eyewitnesses were small-scale traders and adventurers Nathaniel Isaacs and Henry Francis Finn. Despite being well treated by Shaka, they later colluded to portray him as a demonic mass murderer to cover their own dodgy activities, stealing ivory, taking local harems, smuggling guns, and possibly even slaves. Isaacs' account compares Shaka to the barbarian ruler Attila the Hun, but it's unsupported by any solid evidence.
Fucking white people.
Every accusation is a confession, right?
Exactly.
This image gelled nicely with pre-existing stereotypes of African savagery, and it suited colonial invaders to blame the Zulu for depopulating large areas by wiping out other, quote, tribes far inland, freeing up territory for colonial settlement. As the South African historian Shula Marks, among others, showed a long time ago, this, quote, myth of the empty land has no basis in reality. Shaka himself could only, to a limited extent, have been responsible. This was the basis for the phenomenon that a century later would be dubbed the Mfukane Wars. In fact, regional violence long predated Shaka, and the greatest vectors were later, including slaving from Mozambique and Boer British invasion from the southwest. Shaka, by contrast, was as much a haven for disturbed peoples as he was a conqueror. Quoting Wiley directly, "In my view, the unity of this state, the level of violence employed to achieve it, and Shaka's responsibility for knock-on violence further inland have been hugely exaggerated. In my biography, I try to view Shaka as a flesh and blood human being, conducting his leadership within real political and environmental constraints. My conclusion was that we know astonishingly little for certain about him, not when he was born, what he looked like, or exactly when or why he was killed. Never mind his inner motivations. It's astonishing, since Shaka is probably the best-known Southern African black leader after Nelson Mandela. From oral sources, a scholar can glean a better idea of intergroup political dynamics than of the man himself. Precisely in this gap in secure knowledge, myths have flourished." Shaka was succeeded by Dingane, his half-brother, who along with Mlangana, another half-brother, and Mbopa, an Nduna or advisor, all conspired to murder him in 1828. Following this assassination, Dingane then murdered Mlangana and took over the throne. One of Dingane's first royal acts was to execute all of his royal kin, and in the years that followed, he also executed many past supporters of Shaka in order to secure his position. One exception to these purges was Mpande, another half-brother, who was considered too weak to be a threat at the time. So here you see we have some Game of Thrones shit, pretty much.
Man. Yeah. I mean, Game of Thrones has so much going on in it, and all the politics is, like, extremely bloody and violent, you know? So I can see some parallels. It's very cool.
Yeah. I mean, it's just wild. I'm just loving reading about this stuff, and even if it takes me a while to pronounce the names, like, this is the most I've ever heard or known about South African indigenous people.
Yeah, it's super cool.
Yeah, most of my knowledge of this period of South Africa came from horrendous movies made by Hollywood in the mid-20th century about it, like Zulu and Shaka Zulu, which are movies at the time that were about him. And Zulu was about the defense of Rorke's Drift. And in hindsight, it's very interesting how media can portray horrible genocidal freaks as the good guys.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't know any better, you just believe it. Like at the time, I thought the British were the good guys when I watched it as a kid, because the movie tells you the British are the good guys.
Mm-hmm.
And the Boers as well.
Yeah, this is also an interesting story because the Boers obviously were colonists. They came and exploited indigenous people, but then we're going to watch them end up colonized by the British themselves, and it's going to be pretty ironic what happens. But real quick, Jared, do you have something hissing? You get like a wee, like something going on.
Can you hear
You
it
hear
more?
that? Yeah. If you turn it up, I hear it more.
It's not there's cicadas outside.
Oh,
my
that's what it
God.
is.
Yeah, it is almost summer here, so there's cicadas everywhere.
Try turning it down just a little more.
Like that.
Yeah, now I can hear it.
There we go.
Yeah, this time of year, it's just a constant sound of fucking cicadas non-stop and birds and kookaburras. It's like
Yeah.
very fucking loud.
I literally thought you had birds last episode and this one. I was like, he must have like a pet parrot or some shit. Like,
No, that's just what Australia sounds like.
Every Australian has a fucking pet bird.
Yeah. No, it's just my background noise is just cicadas, and I've learned that I just tune it out, and it's crazy because it's so fucking loud. But
That's wild.
I'm just so used to it.
All right. Well, let's see. Where did I leave off here? So, oh yeah, the Game of Thrones stuff that was happening. So,
Oh yeah, with all the succession and like killing between brothers and things like that.
so Mponde was not a threat at the time. He was considered too weak. So that will come up later. That's some foreshadowing right there. I'll have to put some foreshadowing music in the thing there. In the Cape Colony, increasing tensions between some Dutch settlers and the British colonial authorities led to a wave of Boer, also known as Voortrekkers, in migration northwards from 1836 onwards, in order to establish autonomous Boer states independent of British control. The Boer settlers began moving across the Orange River northwards. While traveling, they first collided with the Ndebele Kingdom and then with Dingane Zulu Kingdom. In October 1837, the Voortrekker leader Piet Retief visited Dingane at his royal kraal to negotiate a land deal for the Voortrekkers. In November, about 1,000 Voortrekker wagons began descending the Drakensberg Mountains from the Orange Free State into what is now the KwaZulu-Natal. Dingane asked that Retief and his party retrieve some cattle stolen from him by a local chief as part of the treaty for the land for the Boers. This Retief and his men did, returning on February 3rd. The next day, a treaty was signed wherein Dingane ceded all the land south of the Tugela River to the Zimvubu River to the Voortrekkers. Celebrations followed. On February 6th, at the end of the celebrations, Retief's party were invited to a dance and asked to leave their weapons behind. At the peak of the dance, Dingane leaped to his feet and yelled, "Bambani Abata Kathi," which is isiZulu for "seize the wizards." Now, there's no source for this quote, but it is very entertaining, so I left it in.
Hell yeah, seize those fucking wizards. Get them.
It's like the Red Wedding, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah, speaking of Game of Thrones references. But Retief and his men were overpowered, taken to the nearby hill Kama Tuwane, and executed. Some allege that they were killed for withholding some of the cattle they recovered, but it is likely that the deal was a plot to overpower the Voortrekkers. Dingane's army then attacked and massacred a group of 250 Voortrekker men, women, and children camped nearby. The site of this massacre is today called Wienen, or Dutch for weep. The remaining Voortrekkers elected a new leader, Andries Pretorius, who led a successful defense of the Voortrekker position from the Zulu forces and Dingane at the Battle of Blood River on December 16, 1838, when 15,000 Zulu impis or warriors attacked a group of 470 Voortrekker settlers led by Pretorius. Following his defeat, Dingane burned his royal household and fled north. Mponde, the half-brother who had been spared from Dingane's purges, defected with 17,000 followers, and together with Pretorius and the Voortrekkers, went to war with Dingane. Dingane was assassinated near the modern Swaziland border. Mponde then took over rulership of the Zulu nation. Following the campaign against Dingane, in 1839 the Voortrekkers, under Pretorius, formed the Boer Republic of Natalia, south of the Tugela, and west of the British settlement of Port Natal, now Durban. Mponde and Pretorius maintained peaceful relations. However, in 1842, war broke out between the British and the Boers, resulting in British annexation of Natalia. Mponde shifted his allegiance to the British and remained on good terms with them. It's like, again, this is all the twists and turns of the leadership, how it ends up always just into the colonizers' favor in the end, unfortunately.
That's part of the playbook, really.
Yeah.
Is they do every time they've colonized a place, they've set local groups against each other. The conquistadors did it with, because remember, he had native allies and soldiers, and they turned on them eventually as well. And
That's very true.
yeah, and then you had the what was the Mohican conflict? It was the British-French war. It played out a little bit in the United States, like colonies early on, and I believe the French had Native American soldiers fighting for them. They actually aligned themselves with the French because they hated the British more.
Yeah, it gets so political.
Yeah, and if the war had gone in France's favor, they would have betrayed the indigenous people as well. Yeah, it's the same playbook basically wherever they go. They're pitting groups of natives against each other. It's like a divide and conquer strategy. Because you think about it, the colonizers are always like vastly outnumbered by the people being colonized, generally speaking, until you get to a point like a country like Australia or Canada or the US where it's hundreds of years later and the population's been reduced to a fraction of what it was. But in the initial days, colonizers were vastly, vastly outnumbered. So if the population of people who actually belonged in that land got together, they could have kicked every single one of them out. So part of the strategy for colonization is you need to divide the groups as much as possible.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing with like the New Zealand Maori, where they're absolutely not having any of that treaty that puts them on the back foot again, you know?
Mm-hmm. You'd love to see it. All right, so let's make it back to Mpande here. So Mpande, he had shifted his allegiance to the British, and he remained on good terms with them. In 1843, Mpande ordered a purge of perceived dissidents within his kingdom. This resulted in numerous deaths and the fleeing of thousands of refugees into neighboring areas, including the British-controlled Natal. Many of these refugees fled with cattle. Mpande began raiding the surrounding areas, culminating in the invasion of Swaziland in 1852. However, the British pressured him into withdrawing, which he did shortly after. At this time, a battle for the succession broke out between two of Mpande's sons, Ketsueho and Mbuyazi. This culminated in 1856 with the Battle of Undandakasuka, which left Mbuyazi dead. Ketsueho then set about usurping his father Mpande's authority. When Mpande died of old age in 1872, Ketsueho took over as a ruler. On December 11, 1878, with the intent of instigating a war with the Zulu, Sir Henry Bartle Frere, on his own initiative and without the approval of the British government, presented an ultimatum to the Zulu king Ketsueho in terms with which he could not possibly comply, that the Zulu army be disbanded and the Zulus accept a British resident. British forces crossed the Tugela River at the end of December 1878. Initially, the British suffered a heavy defeat at the Battle of Isandawana on January 22, 1879, where the Zulu army killed more than 1,000 British soldiers in a single day. So they immediately just invaded after presenting an offer that they knew could not be accepted, that was never meant to be accepted.
Oh, you're not going to comply? Well, I guess we gotta fucking kill you all.
Mm-hmm. And initially, it didn't go so well, but the Zulu deployment at Isandawana showed the well-organized tactical system that had made the Zulu kingdom successful for many decades. This constituted the worst defeat the British Army had ever suffered at the hands of a native African fighting force. The defeat prompted a redirection of the war effort, and the British, though outnumbered, began winning small engagements and later larger encounters. The fighting culminated in the siege of Ulundi, the Zulus' capital city, and the subsequent defeat of the Zulu kingdom. In 1883, Ketsueho was put in place as a king over a buffer reserve territory, much reduced from his original kingdom. Later that year, however, Ketsueho was attacked at Ulundi by Zebebhu, one of 13 kinglets. Ketsueho was wounded and fled. Ketsueho died in February 1884, possibly poisoned. His son, Dinuzulu, then 15, inherited the throne. Dinuzulu made a pact with the Boers of his own, promising them land in return for their aid. The Boers were led by Louis Botha. Dinuzulu and the Boers defeated Zebebhu in 1884. They were granted about half of Zululand individually as farms, and formed the independent Republic of Vryheid. This alarmed the British, who wanted to prevent Boers access to a harbor. The British then annexed Zululand in 1887. Dinuzulu became involved in later conflicts with rivals. In 1906, Dinuzulu was accused of being behind the Bambatha Rebellion. He was arrested and put on trial by the British for, quote, high treason and public violence. In 1909, he was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment on St. Helena Island. When the Union of South Africa was formed, Louis Botha became its first prime minister, and he arranged for his old ally Dinuzulu to return to South Africa and live in exile on a farm in the Transvaal, where he died in 1913.
That is so screwed up.
There's so many tales of palace drama, for lack of a better word, where it's all these elites kind of engaging in these power plays that end up directing literal history of this entire region.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about earlier, comparing it to Game of Thrones. It's very character drama.
Yeah. So this is pretty much the end of the Zulu kingdom here. So Dinuzulu's son, Solomon, Ka Dinuzulu, was never recognized by South African authorities as the Zulu king, only as a local chief. But he was increasingly regarded as a king by chiefs, by political intellectuals such as John Langalibalele Dube, and by ordinary Zulu people. In 1923, Solomon founded the organization Inkatha YaKwaZulu to promote his royal claims, which became moribund and then was revived in the 1970s by Mangosuthu Buthelezi, chief minister of the KwaZulu Bantustan. In December 1951, Solomon's son, Cyprian Bekuzulu Ka Solomon, was officially recognized as the paramount chief of the Zulu people, but real power over ordinary Zulu people lay with the South African government officials working through local chiefs who could be removed from office for failure to cooperate. And then this leaves us with the all too familiar dynamic of Comprador native leaders acting as puppets for colonizers. And now going back to 1867 and the discovery of diamonds, we will see why the Europeans felt it necessary to expend such effort to control South Africa.
Gotta get those diamonds.
It's crazy. They not only had a diamond rush, but a gold rush as well. So
I mean, Africa is like one of the most minerally rich continents on the planet, really.
Yeah.
So
Rich in
makes sense.
resources, just unfortunately not in the wealth from those resources, as we will see. So the discovery of diamonds in South Africa occurred in early 1867 on the land of a poor Boer farmer, Daniel Jacobs, near the small isolated settlement of Hopetown on the Orange River in the Cape of Good Hope colony. No one thought the region might contain diamonds, or thought to search for any precious stones. Brazil had been the principal source of diamonds for at least 150 years. Jacob's son Erasmus collected pretty stones, including a shiny pebble, along the south bank of the Orange River that he and other children used in games. His mother noticed it and showed it to a neighboring farmer, who was so intrigued by its appearance that he offered to buy it. The woman laughed at the idea and gave the pebble to him. The farmer thought it might have some value and showed it to several individuals in Hopetown and nearby Colesberg, but found little interest. The civil commissioner in Colesberg, Lorenzo Boys, examined the pebble and discovered that it could scratch glass. He then sent it to Dr. W. G. Atherstone, a physician and amateur geologist residing at Grahamstown who, based on its physical properties, pronounced it a diamond weighing 21.25 carats. It is now known as the Eureka Diamond, and in 1967, 100 years after the diamond's discovery, De Beers purchased the diamond and donated it to the South African people. The diamond was placed in the Kimberley Mine Museum, where it is currently on display. But back in the 1860s, it was purchased for £500 by Sir Philip Wodehouse, the governor of the Cape Colony, who was able to confirm its identity. The news was viewed with some skepticism. Most people at that time had never seen a diamond and only knew of them from books. They debated how and why diamonds occurred in South Africa.
There's no way.
Yeah, they didn't want good news, I suppose. But they got plenty more confirmations, obviously. So this surprise discovery prompted Boer farmers along the rivers to look more carefully for, quote, blink klippe, or bright stones. As news of the initial diamond discovery spread, small parties of prospectors rushed into the region to search for similar gems. Over the following months, additional diamonds continued to be found, and by 1869, these river diggings had yielded hundreds of diamonds, including the discovery of the 83.5 carat diamond known as the Star of South Africa at Sandfontein. Those involved in the search recognized that the presence of garnets was often a very good indicator of the proximity of alluvial diamonds. In 1870, diamonds were found in some abundance on the Bultfontein farm, 20 miles southeast of the river diggings, in what came to be called the, quote, dry diggings, later recognized as diamonds occurring in the upper weathered and decomposed sections of a volcanic pipe. These events started a rush of thousands of people of all backgrounds and from a number of countries to lay claim to sections of land to explore for diamonds over a large area of the Cape Colony, and within 2 decades, many rich deposits were found that would later become the famous diamond mines of South Africa. The discovery of diamonds in Kimberley had significant impacts, to say the least. An influx of miners made their way to Kimberley to claim their stake in the diamond industry. In a matter of months, mining activities occupied the area, but luckily for the miners, there wasn't a shortage of supply. In just 2 years, the mining town went from being an arid piece of land to a buzzing location of wealth. Soon a town was established to accommodate a number of miners from around the world. By 1853, Kimberley had become the second largest city in Africa with 40,000 residents. As any study of colonial crimes will show, Africa is rich with resources, while the wealth from those resources is stolen. South Africa is no exception, and if diamonds were not enough, just a decade later, gold was first discovered in South Africa in 1886 on the Witwatersrand. George Harrison is generally credited with discovering the main gold reef in July 1886.
The George Harrison?
Yeah.
Oh my god, I didn't know he was that old.
The guy gets around. In July 1886, on the farm Langlaagte. However, there were early minor discoveries. In 1884, Jan Gerrit Banches made the first recorded discovery of gold in the Witwatersrand area in June 1884 on the farm...
These fucking Dutch names, dude.
on the farm Vogelstruisfontein.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's actually not that bad. Vogelstruisfontein, sure. The Struben brothers also uncovered the Confidence Reef near present-day Roodport in September 1884. But George Harrison's was the most well-known. And this discovery led to the Witwatersrand gold rush and the establishment of Johannesburg. It was part of the broader mineral revolution in South Africa. Again, this triggered a massive influx of miners and prospectors to the region. Fortune hunters came from as far as Australia and California.
Cringe.
Skilled miners arrived from Cornwall and Wales. Destitute Afrikaners moved from rural areas to the city. Black workers migrated from all over southern Africa. The mining village of Ferreira's Camp quickly formalized into a settlement as people flocked to this area seeking gold. This led to the rapid growth of Johannesburg as a major city, and ultimately into the world's largest gold producer for many years. it led to the development of deep-level gold mining run by wealthy, quote, Rand lords. The gold rush also necessitated rapid infrastructure development, including the construction of the first railway lines in the area. This influx of money and people transformed the economy of South Africa and once again intensified conflicts, now between the Boer republics and British interests in the region. The influx of foreign miners, called Uitlanders, created tensions with the Boer government that would eventually contribute to the outbreak of the Second Boer War in 1899. But before getting to the Second Boer War, we will discuss an example of one early prospector, John Henry Davis. We get all these famous musicians who are also colonizers somehow in the early Dutch regions, but
It makes sense.
he was born in Cardiff, Wales, and was described as a Welsh mineralogist. Davis was a ship owner who lost 3 ships in the Napoleonic Wars.
Owned. Right.
Get wrecked.
Yeah.
Get shipwrecked.
Massive L for that guy.
Get shipwrecked. I love that. He was well educated, spoke 7 languages fluently, and had knowledge of geology, especially regarding gold and diamond deposits in Brazil. He was also knowledgeable about astronomy and invented a new type of compass.
Yeah, a more racist compass, probably.
It's the Frenala compass.
Yeah, the phrenology compass, yeah.
Anyway, so he invented a new type of compass, the racist one. In 1852, Davis traveled through the southern Transvaal searching for precious metals. He discovered gold in considerable quantities on the farm Paardekraal, where Krugersdorp now stands. That's a terrible name.
Deeply unserious people, the Dutch. I'm sorry, but not a real language. Completely fake and made up language. Oh, sorry, Poopersdorp or whatever the fuck it's called. Like, come on. Like, like, just speak English or something. Like, honestly, man, like, if I'm going to pick a colonizer, just speak the language that's less stupid.
I'm so glad the British took them over because I could not deal with these fucking names, dude.
Yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of them are still there, but yeah. Yeah, they should be renamed. So anyway, Davis's discovery in 1852 predates many other famous gold discoveries in the region by decades. He is sometimes referred to as the, quote, pioneer of the Rand in terms of gold prospecting. His find is considered one of the first pieces of the puzzle that eventually led to the discovery of the Main Reef series. When the Volksraad, the Transvaal government, learned of Davis's activities, he was reprimanded by President Martinus Pretorius. Davis was forced to hand over the gold he found, for which he was paid, and was ordered to leave the Transvaal, never to return. And there also is some controversy surrounding his discovery, as historical records from this period are sometimes inconsistent. Some sources suggest his story might be conflated with that of Peter Jacob Marius, another early prospector. So it's possible that his story is a compilation of several people, which also would make sense when you describe him as this guy who knows 7 languages. Like, what do you call that? This kind of jack of all trades.
Like a Renaissance man.
There you go. Thank you.
Yeah. Making the colonizers sound way cooler than they really are.
I like the idea that a colonizer is not interesting enough. Like, an individual colonizer is not interesting enough to have his own story, that they have to put together like 50 different colonizers together to make someone who's like even 1% as interesting as like Shaka Zulu or something. It's like,
that's what I'm saying. Like, they had to combine 3 people to make this guy. Meanwhile, Shaka, they had to demonize because he was so damn cool.
yeah.
Yep.
Also, can we talk about that they called their government the fucking Volksraad? Like, come on. Just fucking... They're just Nazis. Like, honestly.
Yep. They're like Nazi adjacent at this point.
Yeah.
Driving around their Volksrads.
We can wrap it up here. So, as for the indigenous Africans, one of the most immediate and devastating consequences was forced displacement. Remaining indigenous communities were forcibly removed from their territories to make way for mining operations. And of course, those operations created a massive demand for cheap labor, leading to the exploitation of indigenous populations. A system of migrant labor was established, drawing workers from rural areas across southern Africa. Working conditions in the mines were often dangerous and poorly paid, resulting in harsh living conditions for indigenous laborers. And this exploitative system laid the groundwork for long-term economic inequality and racial stratification in South African society, which we'll then see formally turned into the system of apartheid.
Yep. There it is. Apartheid.
And you can see the echoes of that in modern mining practices in Africa as well. Not that much has really changed, you know. They're not necessarily digging up diamonds by hand like the indigenous people were forced to in the past. Now they're in the cobalt mines. Now they're in the lithium mines under very similar working conditions, except it's the year 2024, you know, not the early 20th century, or rather the late 19th century.
Didn't you guys see that clip of the either a representative or someone in Congress? They had like a Freudian slip where they were like, there are resources that we need to exploit in Africa. I mean, protect or something like that. It
Yeah.
was the mask fell off for a second.
You only need to look at the last couple of weeks. Very recently, the number of times I've seen American TV presenters, quote unquote, accidentally say the N word on TV. It's happened like 5 times in the last couple of weeks. I think the mask is just well and truly slipping for Western imperialists at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah. Trump's victory, it's like gives them even more, what you call it?
They're feeling the roads, definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
Are we going to go over the Second Boer War in the next episode?
Yeah, so the next episode, I think we're going to get to that and probably the beginning of apartheid.
I can't wait till we get to the Second Boer War. We get to see Australia's first overseas war. Being
personally invested in that one.
Yeah. Fuck, it's so stupid. It's like, for king and country, we got to go over there and help the British out. We got to help them.
It's not even cool, like, when Castro sends people to, like, Africa to fight for, like, actual liberation. It's like, no, go be lapdogs for imperialism like these Americans too.
Yeah, we're doing an imperialism speed run, basically. We're like, Australians' favorite thing to do is to go to South Africa and Israel. Like, we love doing we love being like, what other countries are very similar to Australia? Let's go there and do additional imperialism.
It is so fucked up.